Let's stay in Melbourne now and catch up with Professor Catherine Bennett, who's the Chair of Epidemiology at Deakin University and is a regular guest, keeping us up to date with all the medical news we need on the vaccine rollout and the like. Thanks for joining us again, Catherine.
Thanks,
First
Chris.
up, we've got the bubble opened up with New Zealand. Whenever you got travel in a pandemic, there's risk, but the risk here is so low, right? Because both countries effectively have quashed community transmission.
That's right. I mean, we're quite similar in the approaches we've taken to trying to manage our international borders, which means that, domestic situations are quite similar in both countries. So that's great news. And isn't it good to finally see that happen with reciprocal, no quarantine required travel in place? And I think it is going to be a first step, hopefully, of many. And every time we take a step, hopefully it not only proves that we can do it safely, but that builds the confidence to go the next step as well. And that will continue as our vaccine rollout does continue to give us more options on what can be done safely. So it's a great first step.
The next country being spoken about is Singapore. Now, again, they've got a very good record with the pandemic, but it's much more of a hub for global travel than New Zealand. So do you expect that will be more difficult?
No, that's actually about setting up arrangements where people can quarantine in Singapore and then treat Singapore almost as a distant port for Australia. So once you've cleared their requirements to get on a plane out of Singapore to Australia, you don't have to then quarantine again in Australia. So that's going to be a good partnership. They're very organised in the way they manage infection control, infection protection within Singapore, and that would give us another way of expanding our border crossing capacity for people returning to Australia as well. So hopefully that will give us another relationship that gives us a secure hub and pathway into Australia that hopefully will turn from talk to arrangements, in the next weeks, if not months. So that's, I think, an important step.
Give us your professional medical assessment of where we'll need to be with quarantine and the like once most of Australia, everybody wants a vaccine, has been vaccinated. I was speaking to a bloke on the weekend who's Australian, who was working overseas, came back, went through quarantine. Now, he's been vaccinated. He still had to go through quarantine. He's been tested that many times for COVID or whatever, but still had to do his 2 weeks in quarantine. How long till, whether it's Australians coming back or other people coming to our country, if they're vaccinated and they test negative on the first day or two, surely the risk there is so minimal to us that we should be prepared to take it?
Yeah, look, the trouble is the virus, if you're incubating it, can take that, 2 weeks. So being cleared on the first day isn't necessarily a guarantee. But what has changed since we first started talking about vaccinated people coming home was that we weren't clear on whether the vaccines were really just stopping symptomatic disease and actually making it harder to find when people were infected, or whether it was stopping all infections. And it doesn't get rid of them completely, but it is getting rid of all infection to a higher degree than we had hoped for before. So that's really good news that we're now in a position to say that's a smaller risk than we thought. How do we manage it? Can we put home quarantine on the cards now? If you have to quarantine, at least until you get a test 5 days in, for example, then maybe doing that at home is something that people can bear.
Well, especially when everyone's vaccinated here, right? All the vulnerable or everybody who wants it is vaccinated here. I know we're some way off that yet, but it's where we hope to be in a few months.
Look, that's right. But I think what we'll still see is not so much, panic about every single case, but certainly surveillance for variants that might come in that whether the vaccine coverage we have might not be such a good fit. And so, obviously we don't have a major problem at the moment, but we do have those variants of concern. Not the UK strain we've seen a lot of and we're a bit familiar with, but we've also had other people coming in with these, the Brazilian and the South African strains as well. So I do think we have to kind of keep that in check so that we've got a system of surveillance that means you get the balance right between people being able to start to move around, come back without major impost. Home quarantine, has been mooted. The states aren't as comfortable with it, but I think we'll come up with processes that work, that are seen to be secure, as you say, against a changed risk assessment, because that's the benefit of getting more people vaccinated, is it gives us the options to do those things. And I think if people realise that, that's more of an incentive to get vaccinated than necessarily worrying about the virus that they just see as being kept to the borders. This allows us to move away from that model of just trying to keep the virus out completely, and allows us to do more because we've got that level of protection.
Thanks for joining us again, Catherine. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Chris.
Professor Catherine Bennett there. I mean, she's dead right. It's all about the balance. But of course, different people see the balance in different places. But honestly, once we get the vulnerable vaccinated in this country, we've got to tilt the balance somewhat.